Hello. All right, so thank you everyone for joining me today. If you were here in the last live stream a couple of weeks ago, we had a few technical difficulties in terms of the internet and the late start and things like that. So far, so good. Everything's going well. Today's live stream will go for a couple of hours, and it'll be predominantly about costochondritis. So as people start to filter through and trickle in, please let me know in the chat. Drop your name, let me know what you're dealing with, and where you're from as well, because we'll dive into the Costo heavy stuff in a few minutes. We'll just wait for anyone who's joining us to join us. Obviously, there will be a replay of this that will be up on the channel as soon as it finishes. So anyone who is late to this obviously can go back and watch all this sort of stuff if they want to. So all right, so I think the first thing that we'll get to, and again, I've got my run sheet here that I'm going to follow. The way that I'd like to structure this is we'll do a little bit of an introduction. I'll introduce myself for anyone who is new to the channel and doesn't know who I am or hasn't heard me talk about this kind of stuff before. We're then going to go through, obviously, what costochondritis is. We're going to talk about the basics. And once we sort of delve into what that is, I also want to use my experience and my expertise to help you figure out why it may have happened for you specifically, because all of these things have to happen for a reason. Once we go through that, I also want to touch on potentially why it hasn't been going away for you, especially if you've been dealing with Costo for a little while now and you've tried everything, you've tried a bunch of different things, and you're still suffering from the symptoms that you've been dealing with for a while. Much like there has to be a reason why it happened, there also has to be a very good explanation for why it may have been persisting for you as well, despite your best efforts, despite all your research, all the health professionals that you've seen. And then once we cover sort of the nuts and bolts of what it is and why it's there and why it isn't going away, I absolutely want to talk about the role of stress, and I want to go through about 7 to 10 exercises that you can try yourself, some mobility exercises, some strength exercises, some exercises surrounding stress as well. And then if we have a bit of time at the end, and if there's enough of a demand for it, I want to go through some question and answers towards the end. I know there's a lot of people that deal with Costo, and a lot of people have a lot of questions about Costo. So as we go through this, as people come and go, please feel free to leave a question in the chat. I'll come back to it when I can. There will be time for those questions at the end. But as I said, for anyone who's just joined, please jump onto the chat. Just let me know your name, where you are at the moment, and a little bit about your Costo adventure or journey to this point. And we'll sort of touch on those things as we go. So I think first things first, my name is Grant Frost. I am an Australian musculoskeletal physiotherapist. I have been now for the last 20 years. And as someone who is really passionate about not only helping people get out of pain and injury, but I'm extremely passionate about trying to understand why people become painful and injured when we shouldn't. And over the last 20 years, Costo is definitely one of those things that seems like there's so much mystery around it when there shouldn't be. There's some definite things that go wrong. There's some definite reasons why it hangs around. And a lot of those, if not all of those, are completely preventable and completely fixable, for the most part. And there's obviously some rare cases that intertwine into Costo and make things really complicated. But for the majority of people, the reason why you have it and the reason why it isn't going away is often it often just requires a slight shift in perspective to take a small step back, to see the bigger picture, and that sort of informs you as the best way to go through this. So as someone who has treated Costo a lot over the last 20 years, when you take each person's specific symptoms and you distill each one of them down to their root cause, you go hunting for where the cause is, you treat it, you see that it feels better, you do that for each symptom. What we often find is all the different symptoms associated with Costo aren't necessarily a bunch of different symptoms existing at the same point in time together, but they're often just an expression of the same root dysfunction. So as we'll get to, all the symptoms, the different symptoms that people can feel, we can often trace them back to the same root dysfunction. So, and the frustrating thing for a lot of people is that Costo tends to be very mysterious. There doesn't seem to be a lot of really good information out there about Costo. I'm sure you've seen a bunch of different physiotherapists and physical therapists, doctors, specialists, probably scoured all the online channels, Reddit and Facebook and things like that. And the quality of information maybe isn't good enough currently. There's definitely some people doing some wonderful things on Facebook and Reddit, but out in the real world, I guess, it's a bit of potluck as to whether you see a health professional or a medical professional who makes you feel that they've nailed exactly what's going on and they can give you a way out of this. So again, please let me know in the chat if you've had a similar experience where it's just been frustrating for you. You've seen people, they've let you down, they haven't really met your expectations. Unfortunately, it's really common. So again, for me as a musculoskeletal physiotherapist who is passionate about trying to explain why things are there are some very basic, simple things that I've come to understand over the last 20 years that I hope to pass on to you to hopefully maybe change your perspective about what it is that you're dealing with, why it's there, and why it hasn't gone away. So that's a little bit about me. So I think the first thing that I wanted to touch on right off the top of this live stream is that with anything costochondritis related, it is really important to validate how you have felt and the experience that you've had to this point. Chances are, if you're clicking on this live stream, you're looking for answers in some way. So many people develop Costo and have Costo persist, and it's just an extremely frustrating, scary, mysterious condition and experience for people to have. So the pain and the symptoms that you feel are obviously real, they are valid, they are important, but unfortunately it's easy for people in my industry to consciously or subconsciously invalidate those feelings and those experiences because we don't have or haven't had the level of understanding to make sense of your experience. So we inadvertently make you feel bad about that it's your fault, that somehow it's in your head, that you're doing something wrong, even though you haven't asked for this in any way, you haven't volunteered for it. It's just something that's happened and it's been thrust upon you, and you just have to deal with it. And part of this live stream is hopefully going to help you understand all of that a little bit better if that is in fact what you need. And so hopefully give you some very clear and consistent things that you can work on that are results based. And I think as we go through some of the exercises that we'll get to in a little bit, I've made a career of making sure that everything that we do is results based. So you don't have to trust me, you don't have to guess. If you've got two different clinicians saying two different things and it's hard to know which one you need to trust or to put your energy and time into, ultimately, if we take all the ego out of it, all the status of being a health professional or a medical professional, put all that aside and just base it on the things that physically and tangibly work, then again, the answers become a lot clearer and a lot more obvious over time. So also I should ask as well, please let me know, is the sound and the video quality okay at the moment? The internet's holding up okay? I'll keep checking chat as we go. But let me know, because obviously that's important. So again, your pain is real, the symptoms that you're experiencing are real, even if you don't necessarily have the understanding of why something is the way that it is for you. And the second thing that I need to validate with Costo is that the experience and the condition still feels mysterious in so many ways for so many people, health and medical professionals included. We like to present that we know everything and that we have all the answers. But ultimately, especially with my experience of people who treat Costo, a lot of people don't necessarily understand why you are having the pain at the front of your chest that you are having, and they just do their best, but ultimately fall short to the detriment of you and your experience. Thanks, Liquid Sun. Appreciate that. So what I hope to do in this live stream is to go through the basics of what Costo is and why it is there, so that you can reflect on how this fits into your life, and hopefully have that aha moment that helps you understand why it's there, why it isn't going away, and maybe why the things that you have been doing may have been helpful, may not have been helpful, or may have ultimately missed the mark. So, and again, for those that are just joining us, if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat. Let me know your name, where you're from, and what you're dealing with, because I want to make this live stream as personal to you and your experiences as possible. So the first thing, I think, when we're trying to understand what Costo is, there's one really simple perspective that we need to take. And that is that the moment that you notice your symptoms at the front of your chest, whether you had no symptoms to begin with and then you suddenly develop symptoms, it's very easy to feel like that the moment that you develop those symptoms, that it's the start of something. Makes sense? You didn't have anything until you had something, so that the start of your pain is when your pain or symptoms start. But the biggest perspective, or maybe the second biggest perspective after we talk about what Costo is, that you need to appreciate is that the moment that you developed your symptoms is more likely to be the last straw, not the start of something new. And that may sound weird or strange, particularly if you are someone who coughed and sneezed and had your symptoms, or maybe you had COVID, or you're in a car accident or something like that, and you feel like that was the thing that caused your symptoms to be there. The perspective that we need to take with this is all of those things, all of those feelings that you may have are completely valid, because you didn't have pain until something maybe obvious like coughing and sneezing caused it, or twisting or moving. But the way we need to think of it is that that moment in time, or that situation like COVID or something like that, was just the thing that tipped you over the edge. It was the last straw. And if you've been a fan of the channel, I posted a video last Monday, my time, so about a week ago. And it was about this concept of most people's pain being the last straw, not the start of something new. And for the purposes of Costo, I really wanted to revisit this because I think it's a really good visual that can help you appreciate why, when you hurt yourself for the first time, when your symptoms developed, there may have been this whole process that you didn't realize was leading up to that. And then the moment in time that got you was just the last straw. It wasn't the cause directly in that essence. So a great way to visualize this is if we can imagine that where you are at the moment with any symptom that you are essentially above this random line here, which is pain or symptoms. If you don't have pain, you have pressure, you have other types of issues around the front of your chest. The misconception that most people have, without it being their fault, it's just one that we sort of perpetuate in the medical industry, is that when you hurt yourself, let's just say you coughed and sneezed for the first time, we have this impression that you ultimately went from anywhere in time from being here to straight up above the line in an instant. You cough, you sneeze, you move the wrong way, you had an accident. The perception is that you go from 0 to 100 straight away. But the reality for most people is that most people, regardless of whether they're sore or not right now, are potentially hovering somewhere just underneath this line. And then the thing that we were doing at the time had just enough force or just enough awkwardness or trauma to it that it just then tipped you over that line. Because when we get into the nuts and bolts of what Costo is and why it's there and the things that cause it, what we inevitably find is that most people start out perfect, and then through the things that we'll talk about, we sort of slowly over time get closer and closer to this line. Some people never get to that line. If they do something positive, they might find they get a little bit further away from that line. Some people may just always hover through here because their life balances the good and the bad out really well. And if they have an incident or an accident, maybe it's not enough to dump them over the line so they can recover from that more easily. And this concept is also really important because if you are somewhere above this line at the moment and you're doing all the good things that you feel are helping, and hopefully some of those things we'll get to in a second, when your symptoms go away, whether it's permanently or even temporarily, the other misconception is that we go from here to immediately back down to perfect straight away. But the reality is that all we're doing is that we're dumping down below that line again at some point. So when we work on the things that we need to work on and we start proving how your back and your front are functioning, then we want to get you further and further away from that line over time. So that if you do have another accident or something goes wrong, you've got that buffer back in. So again, the way that I drew that's pretty horrible, but the concept is really important, that if you can think of your symptoms as being the last straw, then it really helps us better appreciate what we actually need to value and what we need to look out for that may be going on in the background of your life day to day that may have caused your symptoms, or that may be perpetuating those symptoms, or at the very least leaving you vulnerable for those symptoms to come back again during basic, boring things. So if you can keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this, I think that'll help frame this really well. So does that resonate with you guys to start with? I know it's a lot of information to throw at you straight away. Lolly, thank you. Hello from Australia. Hello to the US. Appreciate your approach and style of delivering life-saving information. So and I think too, the people who've been dealing with Costo for a while, it's just a crap experience. It's not fun. It's not an enjoyable experience. Not that pain is in general, but Costo, because of where it is, almost tends to have a pain tax attached to it, where the experience is just so crappy. So the mystery needs to go. We need to make sure that you have a really clear understanding of what you're dealing with and all the different perspectives that you can appreciate, hopefully change how you look at this, so that it can take away a lot of the stuff that feeds into pain and makes it feel really bad. So g'day, Aaron. Any ideas if food or alcohol impact Costo? Recommended vitamin supplements. Awesome. So we'll get to that in a little bit. We'll circle back to those things once we get to the heart of what it is, because when we talk about the peripheral ideas, we need to make sure that we've got all the context to understand why that may or may not be important, or what you may need to prioritize first, because there's a million things you can do. And I'm sure you've heard of a million things and tried a million things. So we'll circle back to that once we get to just before we get to the exercises and things as well. So bear with me. And also I should say to everyone who has just joined us, there will be a replay of this that will be up on the channel as soon as it's finished. So obviously in the US, it'll get late pretty quick. And if you can't hang around for all the other bits that we'll get to, please circle back and watch it at your own leisure as well. So that'll be there. So before we get to what Costo is, again, in the chat, for those that are watching at the moment, do you genuinely feel that you know what Costo is and why it's there? Please just do a simple yes or no, just as a quick poll, because there's a group of people that have a really good understanding of what it is, but just maybe don't quite have the full perspective to make sense of it. And there's other people who just have absolutely no idea, which is frustrating for you and frustrating for me as a physio, because it's not as complicated as it should be. I know that if you've come from Reddit, the guys on Reddit do a really good job of breaking this sort of stuff down. If you've come from Facebook, or even if you're just a follower of the Your Wellness Nerd channel, hopefully you're well informed. But essentially, I think the most important piece of information to give to you guys about Costo is that your pain and symptoms at the front should be thought of as a consequence of dysfunction around the back. Again, that may sound strange if you're not aware of that, because you may not have any overt symptoms around the back. But the best way to think of Costo is that it's a consequence of something else. So whether you have any of the following, whether you have genuine pain and tenderness and achiness, if it feels tight through the front, if your symptom isn't pain, but you get popping and cracking, if you are someone who doesn't have any of that stuff, but you've got a lot of swelling through the rib joints themselves, we need to think of that as a consequence of something else, because that isn't normal. You don't deserve that. That stuff doesn't just happen. Human beings aren't supposed to be sore. There always has to be a very logical and very consistent reason why any musculoskeletal dysfunction exists. And for a lot of people, the mystery is often perpetuated, both patient and therapist alike, because we don't realize that this is dysfunctional because something around the back is making it dysfunctional. And the symptoms that you feel, whatever they are, and as valid and real as they are traditionally a consequence of something else. And on top of that, another topic that we'll get to is that the irritation or the inflammation or the overload, whatever word you want to use to describe it, can be washed over by other things and turned into a bit of a monster. And that's when we talk about stress and things like that, which we'll get to in a second. But if I can grab my laptop here without destroying the internet connection. So I just wanted to show you, and you've probably seen this 1,000 times before, but just to give you a visual with this. So regardless of what your label is, whether you have tenderness, soreness, pain, tightness, pressure, doesn't matter what the diagnosis is. If you have dysfunction through the joints at the front of your rib, where the cartilage attaches to your sternum, or where your rib turns into cartilage, where that sort of line is there, this as a consequence of something else. But what's often forgotten, basic and as simple as this is that if we took, say, your third rib from the top, and we just followed that all the way back, 1, 2, 3, all the way back, and then we get to the third rib joints at the back, there's often some dysfunction at the particular joint where your rib attaches into your spine. Or if you can sort of see here with my finger, the line just here, the joints between the levels of your spine can also be dysfunctional. And for me, clinically, the biggest missing piece of the puzzle is that whoever's in charge of your rehab, or even just your ability to find out this information, in a weird way, doesn't realize that the back is connected to the front. So one of the exercises that we're going to get to, and again, this is kind of where the back pod and lacrosse balls and tennis balls become really valuable. If we don't find the dysfunction that's at the back, free up the stiff ribs, free up the soft tissue over the top, talk about the other things that we'll get to, then in a way we can't give permission for the structures that are literally an expression of that around the front, where those joints are at the front. We don't give that permission to settle down. Now, if you have inflammation, irritation, maybe there's some damage there, which some people may have if it's bad enough, or you've been in a traumatic accident or something, that stuff may still need a period of time to heal and settle down. There's things we can do to speed that up. But ultimately, if we don't create an environment to give it permission to go away, because the dysfunction at the back may have caused that in the first place, if we don't improve that, then it's hard to really get over the top of Costo and fix it forever if we haven't fixed the things that have asked it to be there. So does that make sense as well? Is that something you guys have heard before? Let me know. And it's important to appreciate that all of your attention is rightfully going to be here, and we still need to respect this and treat this to some degree, but we need to pair it up with something that focuses on improving the strength, the mobility, the posture and positioning of the tissue around the back, if we're ever going to take you back in the other direction and get this to go away. And that's why it's so important to think of Costo as a valid thing, but as a consequence of something else. Because if we don't treat your Costo symptoms and pair it up with treating the cause of those Costo symptoms, again, we can't fix this, and we can't say that you no longer have Costo long term. So that's point number one. And again, maybe I'll touch on that exercise with the ball in a second, just while it's fresh in our mind, and we'll circle back to the other ones in a second. But before we get to that, when we inevitably find a whole bunch of stiffness and tightness in different parts of the joints of your upper back, not just the soft tissue, because everything in your body has to happen for a reason musculoskeletally, anything negative that happens, if you're stiff, you're sore, you're weak, doesn't matter what it is, that also has to happen for a reason musculoskeletally. If you have one or two very specific ribs that have become inflamed or irritated or sore, and around the back that we find that that level of your back is also stiff, tight, and restricted, the second thing that we need to consider is there has to be a reason why those exact parts of your spine may have in fact become stiff, tight, and restricted, because again, that isn't normal. And one of the things that we'll get to, again, I keep saying we'll get to this, but just to tee up how we're going to go through this, when we take a step back and look at your day in its entirety, from the moment that you wake up to the moment that you fall asleep, if we take a look at the things that you spend the most time doing with your day, for most people that looks like a sedentary thing, which again, for most people might be sitting. For someone like me as a physio, I spend most of my day treating people. So for me, I don't sit as much as I do, as you can probably see, as I do sort of stand, bend over a bed. So the idea here is if you know that there's certain parts of your upper back that have become dysfunctional, and we also know that that dysfunction has to be there for a reason, if we can take a step back and consider what you do the most throughout your day, and not necessarily what it is, but how you do that, we ultimately find that there is a very strong correlation between where your dysfunction is and how you load that up. And for most people, what that looks like is from a sitting perspective, especially if you are someone who works at a desk all day, or you stand and say you cook or you work at a checkout. When we use the ball in a second, if you find that there's a very specific part of your back that feels stiff, tight, and possibly tender, then there's a very good chance that if you lose a good position, you might find that your shoulders are round, or you'll look down through your head, essentially increasing the load through a very specific part of your back, more predominantly on one side than the other. And what we need to pair this up with is making sure that when you do any exercises, mobility work, strength work, anything you do that you feel improves your symptoms, if we don't then pair it up with an improved awareness and application of better shapes and postures, then again, we're not finding ways to stop that stiff, tight, overloaded tissue around the back from becoming stiff, tight, and overloaded. And again, clinically for me, that is often, as boring as that is, and as simple as that may sound, that is one of the most important things that you need to feel like you're getting better at and mastering if you're not already. Again, posture isn't news to anyone. It's not fancy, it's definitely not sexy, but it's just a reflection of the modern world. And if we're ever going to understand why your Costo developed in the first place, why those joints around the back became dysfunctional enough to make the front dysfunctional enough, we need to take a very strong view of the things that you spend the most time doing. If you need to write them all down, write down what you do each day, and then rank them from the most common to the least common, because naturally the things you do the most are the best places to start. Generally, it's something sitting based for most people. For other people, it's something standing, leaning forward based. It's very rarely the active, interesting things. So if you go to the gym and you're at the gym for 2 hours a day and you feel like that may be contributing, it may be contributing, but it's unlikely to be the cause, because if you also spend 7 hours working, then maybe half an hour in the car to get to work and back, and then you like to sit on the couch and relax from all the sitting you've done during the day. Maybe you play an instrument, you do an arts and crafts, you use your laptop at home, whatever it is. Often the amount of time we spend being physical each day, the unfortunate reality is often that we don't spend anywhere near as much time being physical as we do being stationary. It's just the curse of the modern world. So again, we want to pair up what you do with how you do it, improve how that is, as well as the exercise that we're about to get to appreciate why that is there, so that you can do all these exercises, but then you can also try and change the environment or your habits around that to fix this, to get this to go away. Once all the treatments are successful, we need that to get better as well, to make sure that it's a permanent fix and it's not something you have to deal with again in 6 months down the track. So again, does that resonate with you guys as well? Have you guys explored that before? Is that a gap that you haven't quite covered yet? It'll make a little bit more sense when we go through this exercise in a second, because where you find the things that you find, If we then relay that back to what you spend your time doing the most throughout the day, there has to be a reason for it, and traditionally they line up really closely. So for the next part of this, thanks, Liquid. I'll talk to you soon, hopefully, in the chat or in the comments afterwards. So, but what I'd like you guys to do, if you have a ball lying around, tennis ball, lacrosse ball, back pods, potato, doesn't matter what it is. We just want something sort of round and relatively cylindrical. Where am I going to do this? I'll do this up against the wall that's got some swatches. So because we want to be very results-based with everything that we do, before we do this, and please feel free to do this in real time as well, what I want you to do is get a sense of how your symptoms feel right now. Do a movement or an activity or something that alerts you to how your symptoms currently feel. Because being results-based, we want to go through this exercise, then we want to immediately do the exact same movement or activity again to see if anything's changed. Because if nothing's changed, hasn't worked, we haven't done the right thing. So if you can grab your ball, and we need basically a flat surface like a wall. You can definitely do this on the floor. What I would like you to do is, if you can take your ball, if you know whereabouts your symptoms are, and you just trace a line basically to your armpits, and then for the most part in towards your upper back as well. Just know that the front sort of sits a little bit like lower down than the back does, so you might have to come up and around a little bit. You don't have to be perfect, but we're going to go hunting for what you feel, so it needs to be specific to you. I find personally that a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball tends to be better than something like a rolled up towel, or even the back pod, respectfully, because it tends to be a little bit more sort of pointy than the sort of flatter back pod or a rolled up towel or a foam roller. It tends to be a little bit more specific and a little bit better at finding the dysfunction around the back that we're looking for, that may be causing the dysfunction around the front. So again, all we're going to do here, you can take your device, find the bumps just straight down the middle of your spine. They're the spinous processes. Essentially what they are, excuse me, is they are the bumps down the middle. And what we're attempting to do with the ball is, what we're really interested in here is, we're not interested in putting pressure on the bumps, but if you let it immediately fall straight off the bump, you're going to hit the bony columns either side. And I don't know if you can see this very well, but one of the things that we need to focus on is, where are we? Which one? This one here. So these are the joints, essentially. So when you rotate your body, hang on, it's hard to do this while looking at the camera. So when you rotate your body, those joints slide across each other. When you bend forwards, they open up. When you arch backwards, they close down. When you bend off to one side, it opens. When you bend to the same side, it closes. So in your thoracic spine, these transverse processes are also a joint or a join for the ribs. So you have your rib cage, the joints sort of insert in here. So what we're looking for is the joints of your spine and the rib joints. We're looking for things that feel stiff, restricted, harder, thicker, more so than actually tender. And while they can definitely be tender, and we need to respect that, that's not the thing that we care about the most with this. So again, find that the bump in the middle in an arbitrary area, an arbitrary level, we'll find the right ones in a second. And then just immediately let it sort of fall off to the side. And then what I would like you to do is literally just lean back into the wall and put some pressure on that spot, essentially. You can definitely do this on the floor, as I mentioned. If it's really sore and tender, you can do this sitting up against the wall. You can use a softer ball. Just use the device that you feel is comfortable, it feels safe, and you feel like it's actually doing something. Because again, what we're looking for, so I'm on my right-hand side here. We want to take note of, does it feel stiff, tight, hard, restricted, dense, tender potentially, more so than the other side. So if you compare just the one level, one side to the other, what you will find, and what most people find, is one side will feel harder, stiffer, thicker, tighter, more restricted. The other side may feel more supple, more soft. It doesn't feel as interesting, regardless of where the tenderness is. Because the nuance to this exercise, and potentially where a lot of people go wrong without realizing it, using a ball or a back pot or something, is that we just jam it in there and hope that it's doing something. So if you have around the back, if you have if you have your symptoms, if your Costo symptoms around the front are on your left-hand side, but then when we come around the back and you find that the joints either side of your spine around the back, the rib joints and the spinal joints, are actually stiffer on the right-hand side, then the right-hand side is actually where you need to free up to feed some slack around to help the left-hand side feel better. So the reason why we don't want to just focus on where feels the most tender is that your left-hand side might feel the most tender, but if the joints on the other side feel the most stiff, that's what you need to free up. And while that may sound a little strange and a little confusing, if we take a step back and realize that your body doesn't care about left and rights, your body is a closed system, it's all connected. So the example I like to use just to highlight this is if you can imagine, I've got my jumper on, it wraps all the way around the back and the front. If I pull a bunch of slack out of my jumper from behind, you can hopefully see that it affects the tissue around the front. If I pull it around this way, again, it affects the tissue around the front as well, which is why Costo tends to develop. But more importantly, if I have a bunch of sort of tightness here on my right-hand side, this could become sore and tender. But if this side becomes sore and tender, let's say I tore this part of my jumper, my sweater, if this became torn and I keep repairing it, I think, geez, my jumper's not very good. It's a bit loose and it's very fragile. It's not very good. But I didn't realize that this other side's pulling a bunch of slack out of that side, making it likely to tear, until I find where it's restricted and get that to go away and restore normal function to the system. Either side can be a problem. So I really want to stress with this is when you're using whatever device you use or are going to use, respect anything that feels tender, but if you can put that aside and go looking for which spots around the back feel the thickest, the hardest, the ball doesn't sink in as easily as it does on the other side, we're trying to mobilize those stiffnesses and tightnesses. So if it doesn't feel stiff and tight, you don't need to be jamming something in there, because if it's sore and it's not tight and you just jam something in there, you could just be irritating something or threatening something that's already irritated and threatened. But one of the secrets to the mechanical aspect of Costo is you need to find where those hidden restrictions are around the back, being very agnostic, double check which side you feel is the most restricted. And as I mentioned, if you find the bump around the back and just come straight off to the side of that, you'll be on the spinal joint. Become a fraction wider again, you'll hit the rib joint. So in your thoracic spine in your upper back, there are two spots that you want to check out on both sides. As a spoiler and as a bit of a cheat sheet, my experience shows me that most people will be stiffer on one side. So it doesn't go, stiff here, stiff here, stiff here, stiff here. It's typically just one side. The ribs, the spinal joints on the same side feel the most stiff. And as I mentioned, in the spirit of not wanting anyone to trust me or to, have to take a leap of faith with this, if you can spend 30 seconds, a minute or two on the ball, letting it press into that spot. So not rolling around. We don't want you to spend your time sort of like going up and down, trying to sort of massage the tissue. We want you to find a spot that you feel is stiff and restricted. We then want you to stay on that spot for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever you feel is necessary to feel like it starts to settle and soothe and free up, and then just move up to the next spot or move out a little bit wider to hit the rib joint. Go exploring exactly what you feel is there to explore, and spend as much or as little time as you feel you need to, respectfully asking those tissues to free up. Again, don't roll, it's not specific enough. Constant pressure, get specifically onto the joints, ask those joints to start to move and free up a little bit. Same thing with the rib joints. And then in the spirit of basing everything on results, the reason why this is such a great way to think about it is, if you spend 2 minutes doing one joint, you think, I wonder what impact that's having. If you then come back to the exact thing that you did before, whether it's taking a deep breath, twisting, bending, coughing, sneezing, whatever it is, do that again, provided it's not too uncomfortable, and then immediately see if that's done anything. If it has, you just found something that's valuable. makes it more meaningful, means that you need to do more of that to get the same result. And then go up a little bit higher, go a little bit lower, come out a little bit wider. Keep doing that so that you can pair up the spots that you find are stiff, tight, and restricted to how that makes your symptoms feel. And as soon as you know exactly which joints and levels you need to mobilize in part to make this go away, then you have that forever. And then it doesn't matter what you read on the internet, it doesn't matter who you see or what any health professional tells you, you can't argue with results. It won't be all in your head, it won't be a placebo, it will be a tangible connection that you found. And if you keep doing the same thing and keep getting the same result, that is a very real avenue that you need to explore to get on top of those Costo symptoms. So I'll keep saying this, but does that make sense to you guys? Is that news to you? Is that nuance of like, it can be the opposite side that you need to treat to make yourself feel better? Have you heard that before? Is that something that you've been working on specifically? Because I think that nuance is missed. Not only do a lot of people not realize that the back is causing the front, but sometimes it's even more confusing that the back on the opposite side can be causing the front. And it's not the same for everyone. I would say, in my experience, about 50% of people have all this stiffness and tightness on the same side that they have their symptoms around the front. But it's that other 50% that have the symptoms on the opposite side to where their stiffnesses are around the back. Naturally, the ones that may also struggle to conquer this as easily as the other 50% of people. So I think that perspective, the perspective of understanding that what you are dealing with is the last straw, not the start of something new, where the front becomes irritated, annoyed, damaged, whatever it is for each person, because of this latent, hidden buildup of mechanical dysfunction through your rib cage, which starts around the back, and that it has a very strong, tangible link to the shapes and the postures that you put that part of your back into. Then we start to better appreciate that, in a way, Costo can be relatively obscure or mysterious unnecessarily, despite the fact that in theory, and I say this respectfully, it can be a very simple, basic dysfunction. But the next thing we'll talk about in terms of stress can complicate it a little bit, but just that missed perspective alone is enough to confuse people and perpetuate Costo unnecessarily in almost every case. It's so commonly misunderstood, but once you understand it and can see that perspective, it's relatively straightforward. So, but the nuance, again, to your specific situation and what's been perpetuating this, we'll get to again in a second. But just to tie all this sort of section off into a bow, one of the great things about using a ball of some sort is once you know exactly which spots in your back feel the stiffest and the tightest, and you've confirmed to yourself that they are relevant in how your symptoms feel, then again, that previous conversation that we had that suggests that everything has to be there for a reason, when we're looking at the levels that you have, when we then superimpose the postures and the shapes that you might be getting into, you should then very clearly see why those levels are dysfunctional, and more importantly, why the right or the left side has become dysfunctional. If it's your right-hand side and you use the mouse a lot, and that mouse hand is always dropping and rolling your shoulder forwards, and the weight of your arms just always hanging off that part of your upper back, then again, for that stuff to go away and for this stuff to go away, you may be required to pull everything back a little bit more and get back into that ideal posture once again. Because again, if we don't, then we're just not giving the irritated, overloaded stuff a chance to go away. So, all right, so we'll get to stress now. Just want to read a couple of the chat. So Aaron, just from your previous comments, inflammation of the areas around the ribs or sternum, either from an injury or simply a mystery flare-up for unknown reasons. So I completely agree with what you're saying, and I think the mystery flare-up for unknown reasons is the thing that on my platform with my small voice, I want that to change. I don't want people who have a flare-up to wake up one day and think, I just feel crap today. I don't know why. As we start to get through this, you should then be able to look back and say, right, I can see that I woke up and felt really crap this morning. What did I do yesterday? Oh, I got engrossed. I was doing something on my laptop for 3 or 4 hours, or I was at work all day, or my wife and I went to trivia down at a local sports club 2 days ago. We're just sitting down in a bad position for a couple of hours. You should then be able to start to piece it together based on what you understand to be true about Costo and take away the mystery, because it's not officially mysterious. It's just made out to be mysterious, and it feels mysterious because we haven't given people enough of an ideal perspective to understand what's going on and to make sense of what's going on, more importantly. So, I think much watching this. All right. So, Aaron, let me know too if you use the ball, and just double check whether it is the same side for you or it's opposite sides. I'll be really interested if that's maybe a missing piece. It may not be, but if it is, I'd love to know. So, all right. So we've discussed hopefully some mechanical stuff associated with Costo, where regardless of what your diagnosis is, regardless of what the symptoms you are experiencing, whether it is popping, cracking, swelling, a sharp pain, a dull ache, a pressure, whether you don't feel any pain like some patients that I have do, but it's just a tightness in your chest, it matters what your symptoms are, because we need to validate that, because that's what your symptoms are. But when we're trying to fix it, it's not that each one of those symptoms has a different cause. The best way to think of it is it's just a different expression of the same root underlying dysfunction for most people. So if you have some stiffness around the back, the consequence can be, if it happens enough, or you have a traumatic incident that exposes it, you can have some damage or some inflammation or some irritation there. If it's not irritated enough and it's not painful, but it's tightness, pressure, again, that can be referred from the back. It can be a chain reaction of events around the front. If you have like an intercostal neuralgia or something like that as well, yes, that is slightly different to an irritated rib joint at the front, but the reason why that's there is essentially still the same thing. So all the different expressions are still based on the same theme of dysfunction around the back. If that's not there, you don't deserve to have this dysfunction around the front. And just quickly on that as well, clearly, if you're playing sport and you get hit in the chest, or you have a car accident or a fall and you get hit in that area, you can do some legitimate damage and develop Costo. But coming back to the original conversation about it being the last straw, what we want to make sure that we appreciate with that is, if you already have developed a bunch of stiffness in your upper back, and maybe the function of those rib joints at the front have been suboptimal to some degree, but not enough to cause pain on their own, your ability to bend in that moment or break is dictated by how good that is functioning beforehand. So, for example, if you copped a bump to the chest and you irritated a rib joint, and that's your Costo, if, for example, in another world, you were really loose and free through your rib cage, then maybe that same bump, the same force from the same bump, may not have breached your tolerance. It may have just got you a little bit closer, and then it wasn't a big deal. So regardless of why you have your symptoms, the conversation essentially is still the same. So we need to make sure we're valuing those things. When we circle back to really common things like COVID, I know COVID's a bit of a touchy subject for a lot of people anyway, but obviously COVID can be linked to some degree to people developing Costo. But if you can appreciate the mechanical stuff of Costo, COVID, much like the stress stuff they're about to talk about, it needs something to pick on. COVID, the vaccine, any way you want to look at it, there needs to be a very specific reason why one specific part of your body has become dysfunctional, and not everything. None of those things, coughing and sneezing, which is normal, none of those things are specific enough to explain why one or two specific parts of your rib cage, on the right side, the left side, both here, not here or here, they're not specific enough to explain why that has become dysfunctional. But when you take that step back and run it through the filter of postures and developing stiffnesses and tightnesses in certain areas, then we start to understand and can see it more clearly that something like coughing and sneezing, moving the wrong way, all the stuff that you may identify as having irritated your symptoms, they are just the thing that exposed the mechanical dysfunction underneath. So while it can be quite frustrating where, say, if you cough and you think, I didn't have Costo and now I do, and I'm going to be scared to cough for the rest of my life, or, it's just bad luck or something like that. Understanding the undertones of why it's there in terms of the back causing the front and the posture causing the back. All of a sudden, when you fix these things and get them to a point where your body doesn't feel sore here anymore, you don't have to live in fear anymore of getting COVID or coughing and sneezing or getting hit, because that's not the problem. The problem was just the boring stuff behind the scenes. So hopefully that perspective helps things make sense, because we need to make sense of this. You don't deserve to have mystery or confusion around this for the reason that we're going to talk about now. So once we've sort of put a pin in the musculoskeletal stuff, you can hopefully check your postures out, all the sitting stuff, and the dysfunction that from the back that wraps around the front causes the front to be sore. The reason why stress is so important is because stress can turn your symptoms into a monster. Stress, like coughing and sneezing, moving the wrong way, all that kind of stuff, isn't, again, specific enough to cause Costo, but it can expose it, and it can turn it into something that's more permanent and more persistent and more intense and uncomfortable than the level of musculoskeletal dysfunction might otherwise dictate. And I think to sort of give you the right perspective on this, if we just take a step back, we just want to talk about what pain means. And that may sound silly. You definitely, if you've got Costo, you know what pain feels like. But sometimes it gets a bit lost as to what it represents. So the story basically goes that for years, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, in the medical industry, we have discussed pain from a perspective that it's based on damage. So you cop a knock, you break something, you injure something, and that generates pain. And while that is true, that stuff generates pain, we now know that pain isn't exclusive to tissue damage, because for years we've had people that have horrible tissue damage and have no pain, and we have people that have no tissue damage but have excruciating pain. And for a long time that didn't make sense. And for me, in my understanding, that's one of the main reasons why we've developed this idea that it's all in your head, or that it's a placebo, or that because we can't find tangible evidence of damage, so we immediately invalidate your symptoms because we can't see something on a scan, or there's nothing there that seems obvious. And thankfully, that perspective sucks. It's crap. We're moving away from that, because what we now know is that all pain represents is it just represents your brain and nervous system's perception of threat. That obviously includes tissue damage. Some tissue damage is intensely threatening, which is why we get pain. But the intensity of your pain threshold, is squarely based on how threatened or safe your nervous system feels about something. And well, that's really important to understand. It's that fight or flight response where injury or damage, or you reaching that threshold of your tissue's tolerance, dumps you into that fight or flight response, a low grade level of that where your nervous system becomes heightened because something's threatening, something within is threatening, as opposed to something outside being threatening. And the reason why this is so important is because pain's based on your brain and nervous system's perception of threats. Anything else that's going on in the world, any sort of stress, any past trauma, anything that you deal with that sucks, that is frustrating and challenging, of which the entire Costo experience falls within that category, the mystery, the misdiagnoses, the people not validating your feelings and all that kind of stuff, all of this together does nothing to settle your brain and nervous system's perception of threat. So if you have background financial stress, relationship stress, religious stress, cultural stress, work stress, again, stress from being in pain through Costo, the mystery of Costo, If you have been unfortunate enough that in your past you have dealt with some form of trauma, mental, physical, sexual abuse, anything that you feel may be leaving a legacy on your life, what that stuff tends to do is it tends to leave your baseline nervous system activity, that fight or flight response, more heightened. And the reason why that's important is because the more heightened your nervous system is at rest, the more pain exists. Your pain intensity, your Costo symptoms, if none of that was there, and not everyone has it, but a lot of people that have persistent Costo may have something that's meaningful to you in that space. If those things are still there, then whatever symptoms that you feel that may otherwise be a 1 or a 2 out of 10, suddenly and respectfully become a 3 or a 4 out of 10 or a 5 or a 6 out of 10. If you have a pain intensity or a symptom intensity that you genuinely feel is a 7, an 8, a 9, or a 10 out of 10, then at least in my experience, and I can't speak to everyone, but in my experience, that would indicate that you may not have a 7, 8, 9 out of 10 mechanical dysfunction. You may have the same mechanical dysfunction that everyone else has, but there's something in the background that you are unfortunately dealing with, whether you realize it right now or not, that may be adding that extra pain tax on top of it. And the reason why this is so important is because if you are someone who is just focused on all the really important musculoskeletal things, you're loosening things up, you're strengthening things, you're working on your posture, you're taking medications, all that kind of stuff, and you're not addressing the potential background stuff that isn't Costo related, but it's just life related, then it's really hard to expect your nervous system to naturally feel safe if extraneous environmental things are consistently keeping it there. And again, I don't want to pry and I don't want to be disrespectful and say it's there even if you don't feel like it is. But what I would ask you to do is either now while we're talking about it or when you get a moment to process all the volumes of information that I'm throwing at you, just see if you can identify as someone who is dealing with some form of constant, persistent stress in the background. Because if you are, and that may be washing over the top of your musculoskeletal symptoms and turn them into a monster, then again, it gives us something to take a results-based approach towards to see if that is also something you need to focus on. And one of the exercises that we'll get to, there's some really simple things you can do that can help down-regulate a heightened nervous system, much like a dimmer switch on a light. We don't want your dimmer switch to be set at 10 constantly. We want you to wind it all the way back down again, take away that global general threat perception so that the symptoms that you're experiencing at the front, regardless of what they are, have a safer space for your brain and nervous system to be more likely to let go and not hold on to because there's so much going on. And as a sidebar, the more heightened your nervous system is, the stiffer stiffnesses tend to be, the tighter tightnesses tend to be, the more tender tendernesses tend to be. So it can work both ways, bring down your nervous system, but giving permission for those restricted structures, which are trying to hold on more so because they are more threatened. It gives it more meaning, gives it a chance for us to do something important like that. So, and again, if we can take this perspective, and I'll keep saying this, and hopefully it's not getting annoying, but just to keep going back over it, that the symptoms at the front are generally a consequence of some dysfunction around the back, which can be a consequence of the daily, boring, everyday, monotonous, not sexy at all postures and shapes you may get into consistently throughout your life, doing the things that you want to do and being distracted from that fact. Those things need something to, those things are picked on by something like stress. So, and whether it's stress or trauma or just challenging things, we need all of those things to get better. We need you to feel like you're making progress. And if I can, again, circle back to the very first 2 or 3 things that I mentioned, and I'm checking my run sheet here, is it is really important that we validate not only how you feel, but potentially the crap experience that you may have had to this point. We also need to acknowledge that Costo is mysterious unnecessarily, and that despite being very well-trained, well-educated health professionals, some of us may not have the perspective to do the best job with you. It's a frustrating experience. You pay good money to see people. They don't help you. It just feeds into this mysterious notion of Costo. It also feels mysterious if you have a random flare-up. Nothing happened. And you're like, well, why did that happen? Hopefully, if we can appreciate the context and the framework of posture and stuff around the back, and you can apply that to the day before and start to understand, I never thought there was something, but when I look back, I was in this position for ages that wasn't good enough, and my body felt the consequences the next day. As we can start to make sense of this stuff, we take away the mystery, we take away all of the sense of helplessness as well. Your brain and nervous system start to feel safer about this experience. You've got more purpose, you've got things that you know are working because you're doing results-based things. You're not having to guess, you're not having to trust anyone, and suddenly you can feel more confident and more positive about this. One of the main reasons why that's so important, apart from the obvious, is that it can genuinely feed back through your symptoms and make your symptoms feel better because you're feeling less stressed and heightened and threatened about this experience. One of the really common experiences a lot of people have, and I'm sure someone on the live stream today will certainly have experienced this, but people who feel like they're having a heart attack or having some heart-related issues, and the only reason that you've come back to a diagnosis of Costo is because you went to the emergency room, they checked your heart out, really stressful, and then they said, look, we can't see anything, it's probably just this. And it's kind of thrown at you after the fact. All of that does nothing to make you feel safe and your nervous system feel safe. So one of the main reasons why I wanted to do this live stream today, apart from the fact that there's just so many people that are unnecessarily dealing with Costo, is I want to play my role, however big or small, in demystifying Costo and giving a very logical and very correct framework that you can piggyback off to then understand the nuances of your situation and what you might be dealing with. So with that being said, again, how does that resonate with you guys as well? Do you have any questions based off of that? I want to make sure I sort of get to them. We'll give you a few seconds to pop them in the chat if you do want to ask me something. Because the next thing we're about to do is I'm going to take you into the sort of little gym area I have here. And I just want to go through some, just like an array of exercises that I think are foundational exercises that I think everyone should try to see if they give you the results that they give my patients. Again, if it works for you, that's a result. If it doesn't work for you, that is still really good information that may get us one step closer to figuring out what does work for you. But we're going to go through some stuff through the back, through the front, some strength stuff. Even though we haven't touched on that, I don't think strength is the limiting factor for most people with Costo. You can just never be strong enough. And there's some simple ways that you can get a little bit stronger to help support better function around the back. And then the final bunch of exercises that we're going to get to are going to be stuff. There's two really simple ones that can help down-regulate a heightened nervous system naturally. If for no other reason than if you don't do any exercise, you see how your symptoms feel, you do the down-regulatory stuff, and then check in with your symptoms again. It's a great way to understand what percentage of your dysfunction is currently because your nervous system may be heightened and threatened, and how much of it is just the mechanical stuff. So it's just good to figure that stuff out. So we haven't got any questions come through, which is fine. Like I know there's sometimes it's a bit awkward to ask a question on stream. But if you are watching this, please pop it in the comments below because I can come back to it maybe after the fact and have a dialogue with you. I haven't said this yet, but it's probably a good opportunity to, if this stuff's resonating with you, please like the stream. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. I post videos all the time about a lot of different things, but ultimately the videos are based on my experiences with patients and being results-based, what gets results. Sometimes it's a little bit different to what people would expect, but I stand by it because it works. It's safe and it's effective. So, if you appreciate the perspectives that I have and you just want more of that kind of stuff, consider subscribing. We're pretty close to 100,000 subscribers. I'd love to get there before the end of the year, but we'll see what happens. Coming back to what Aaron said, probably about an hour ago now. Hopefully, still watching there, mate. Any ideas if food or alcohol impact Costo? So it's a very good question, because this speaks to the more peripheral concepts that get thrown around with things like Costo. So hopefully you can appreciate, if you didn't already, and it sounds like you do, but for anyone else watching this, is that the heart of Costo is musculoskeletal dysfunction. If that isn't there, in theory, Costo shouldn't exist. So you need specific musculoskeletal stiffness, tightness, overloaded tissue that prompts the front to become dysfunctional for any of the other things to have something to pick on. So whether it's stress, lack of sleep, the foods that you eat, alcohol, exercise, anything that's relatively normal, if the musculoskeletal stuff isn't there, nothing should cause Costo. It shouldn't exist from that perspective, from a general perspective. So if we look at the foods that some people eat, and I will admit, again, I'm not a dietitian or a nutritionist. This stuff isn't my wheelhouse. So I'm not as ready to give advice, specific advice on this sort of stuff, because it's not my expertise, it's not my field. So I want to stay in my lane. But from a general perspective, most things in the world can be seen as either a threat or a safety, or something that's safe. So foods are normal. Normal foods are normal. So anything that's natural, without sounding too strange here, like there's foods that we've invented, junk foods, candies, lollies, certain drinks. There's, pesticides, preservatives, things that we've added to things that aren't normal. Our body's a natural organism like every other animal, every other thing in nature. So in theory, the things that are normal shouldn't really cause abnormal things. Alcohol isn't necessarily normal, especially with a bunch of stuff that we add to it. So things that tend to be abnormal tend to be in some way threatening to your nervous system. And there are definitely genetic differences. And again, this is why, for specific advice, a dietitian, nutritionist, someone who can do blood work and then tell you, hey, you're one of those people where nuts don't necessarily agree with you, or blueberries, or whatever it is. Like, there's nuance to that conversation. But from a general perspective, the natural foods aren't necessarily the inflammatory foods. The things that cause inflammation and cause our nervous system and our body's pH to become a little bit more acidic versus more alkaline. English isn't my strong point today. They tend to be like the refined sugars, the numbers, the preservatives, the stuff that we put into foods for whatever reason. So there is a world where the more we threaten ourselves with the unnatural stuff, it can pick on something. If something's inflamed and it's painful, maybe it becomes more inflamed, more painful. Again, to be very results-based, the best way that I would suggest to figure out the role of certain foods, the role of certain drinks, alcohols, is to naturally take one out of the equation, a couple of days, a week, see how you feel. If you then add it back in again and nothing else changes, you haven't magically sat in a crap position for 10 hours the day before, everything's relatively the same, and you add it back in again and you feel your symptoms spike, then it doesn't guarantee that that was the thing, but it gives you something that you can potentially do without if it's not a big deal. So I think a lot of those sorts of things, there may be certain foods that not irritate, but like feed into the dysfunction that's already there. There may be things that reduce the dysfunction that's already there. But if that dysfunction is already there, then you can be the best diet, abstain from all the good things, all the bad things, whatever you feel you need to do. But unless we solve the mechanical stuff, you may just be a couple of long trips and fast food experiences away from something potentially coming back again. So I think hopefully that answers that question a little bit, because it is very nuanced. It's not my expertise as a physio. I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian, so I want to be very respectful to that. But just conceptually, threat versus safety tends to be a really strong perspective to have, to understand what you may need to move towards and move away from. And in my experience, the principles that govern what I do with physio tend to also apply to other things, because if they're correct, they should express themselves in other ways in other fields as well. So that's something to consider. So G'day, Kate. G'day, Fax. You rock. How are you? What happens is I'm tight and need to stretch my shoulders back and chest pops. So some popping. Yeah, Kate, so just about that. So symptoms 100% spike from refined sugars and alcohol. You cut those out. So as I mentioned, like cutting those out, why not? You know, you're only going to be healthier for having those things out of your system. We just want to make sure that you're doing more than one thing at once. So if we're doing the musculoskeletal stuff and you're seeing progress with that stuff, if everything's perfect with that stuff, then there's a world where if you wanted to or had to have some refined sugar, you wanted to have some alcohol, you know, your body should have enough tolerance to buffer that or absorb that without it sort of causing a flare up. But when you're in the midst of it all and you're in a flare up, you're trying to do whatever you can to get out of that, and potential limiting those things which are unnatural and abnormal for the body might be a lever that you can pull. So yes, that's important. So you rock. In terms of your question about your chest popping and things like that, what happens to me is I'm tight and need to stretch my shoulders back and my chest pops almost every time. Is that normal? We haven't covered it. Welcome anyway. Popping's just started in the past year. I have other symptoms that you've mentioned in the past 15 minutes, but I've been tested. My chest pains are not cardiovascular. So the symptoms of popping, common, not normal. So it's common because so many people have that symptom, whether they have Costo or not. Some people's chests pop, but it's abnormal because you don't deserve to have it. It's not something that the body has to go through, but it is a genuine symptom of the stuff that we're talking about. So chest popping in a way is very similar in concept to like cracking your knuckles, in a sense, where cracking your knuckles isn't bad, but all cracking a knuckle is that you are opening up the joint space enough to release a built up gas pressure bubble. And when you open up the joint, the bubble pops, you get the pop. And that's called a cavitation officially, whether anyone cares. But same thing with your chest. If your chest feels like it pops and cracks, it is doing so because the joint is functioning dysfunctionally and there's like a pressure buildup in that joint. So if you consistently pull your shoulders back, and we can be very results-based, it's a perfect example. If you pull your shoulders back to start with and you feel your chest pops, then you take your lacrosse ball, tennis ball that we went through a little bit earlier, so you may need to go back to watch that. And you find the side of your spine, the joints that feel the stiffest, the tightest, the most restricted. You do the thing, you free them up, you feed some slack back into those joints around the front. If you then pull your shoulders back and you've improved that and it's connected to this, you shouldn't feel like it needs to pop either as consistently or as severely. And then as that stuff around the back gets better, there's no reason why your chest should pop if everything is mechanically functioning normally with your rib cage. So be results-based, do that first. Treat your symptoms, do it again. Make sure that you feel that something is different. Because if it's not different, nothing's changed. Either what you did wasn't quite what you needed to do if the concept was correct, or it's just not the thing that you need to do. But based on what I understand to be true over 20 years of treating Costo, you deserve to see some progress if that dysfunction around the back is located and reduced, and then the postural habits over the top then support that not coming back. So just something to consider. And I think what you mentioned to Kate about asking you, Rock, about doing weights. Again, weights can absolutely irritate people's symptoms, but that aside, weights are normal. Lifting weights, it's a normal expression of human function. We're supposed to be able to lift things and do things. The formality of lifting weights should be good for people at some stage. It just depends where on the recovery spectrum someone is or whereabouts they are with their symptoms as to whether certain exercises feel comfortable and safe to do today. Maybe tomorrow will be fine once the back starts to free up and the postures get better. Weights can definitely cause people's pain, or at least it can feel like it does based on the concept we went through earlier, where it shouldn't cause you Costo, but it can expose the dysfunction that's underneath. Really important perspective. But if certain weight exercises, like chest exercises, push-ups, anything, stir up your symptoms, we logically need to respect that because it's something that irritates your symptoms and threatens your nervous system. So if we just kept doing it, you can't beat the crap out of your nervous system and expect it to calm down. We need to meet it at its level, respect it at its level, and then work within whatever feels safe and successful while we're working on all the other things we've identified around the back and posturally to give it that sense of safety again. So that's a really important perspective to understand. Hi, Diane. Can I use a tennis ball every day if it helps? Absolutely. You can use it for as long or as little as you feel comfortable. You'll know if you haven't done it much and the side that feels stiff to you also feels quite tender, you may feel that there is a limit as to how long you feel comfortable doing it. Your tissue might start to feel a little bit raw, or maybe you start to feel like you're getting a little bit tender. It's a very specific thing to you. If you do it, the minimum amount of time you want to do the ball exercise is one that you feel gives you a result. And that result is ideally you want to feel like a little bit looser through your back. And then on top of that, it would be great if you also felt your symptoms felt a little bit better. But we're trying to free up your back. So if you get up after 30 seconds on the ball, because that's all the time you had before you ran out the door for work, you hit the spot that you know that you've identified as the most stiff, then absolutely that's enough. If that's all you can do, that's great. At least you did something. The maximum dosage is personal to you. Just do it for as much or as little as you feel comfortable doing or can be bothered doing because you're busy, you've got stuff to do. So for me, I always recommend people do it of an evening. If you would normally sit on the couch and watch TV, lie on the floor, relax, do it then. Just kill two birds with one stone. Use your phone instead of sitting down using it, maybe in a bad position. Watch some TV, use your phone, hunt around for those spots, then retest your symptoms, see if anything meaningful has changed. The other thing I'll say is just make sure that the device that you use is good enough. Tennis ball can be nice if you're a little bit tender, it can be more gentle. A lacrosse ball can be better if you're less tender but more stiff. Just make sure that you're using the device that's hard enough and respectful enough to whatever your symptoms are around the back. Really, really important. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah, and I agree with what Kate's saying. Start small, build into it, listen to your body. You will know, hopefully with the framework that we're discussing here, you can get that perspective that we sort of understand. And again, you may need to go back and watch the first part of the stream, but if you can understand this perspective and realize that it's relatively basic and relatively simple, as a rule, then your specific context, we can fill out that framework based on how it fits into your life, how your symptoms feel and respond to things. If you can pair up the information that I'm hopefully sort of passing on to you now with how you feel and how your body reacts to what you do, you can figure out the perfect scenario through this better than I can, better than any health professional can, because you have your symptoms and how your symptoms make you feel right there at any stage. So as long as you're respecting what they are, working within it, but trying to build on the framework or from the framework that we're discussing, then things should keep getting better and better and better and better because we're fixing the cause as well as hopefully respecting your symptoms and addressing those symptoms at the same time. So important perspective. So I think if anyone who's just joined us, again, please leave some questions in the chat. I'll circle back to them. Please like the stream just so more people can find it. Share this. If anyone's come from Reddit, Facebook, again, I apologize. I now know that posting links to groups and subreddits not necessarily is necessarily frowned upon. So if you are happy to share this with people that you feel may need to hear this, I would appreciate it. I feel like there's answers here. It's based on what I find clinically. I feel like this can help people figure their own stuff out. So please let people know if you're part of a community that is dealing with Costo. I'd appreciate it because hopefully it can help more people. So, so with that being said, let's go through some of the exercises. And then we can go through it. So Aaron, I just want to touch on this. It's a very good perspective. Aaron just mentioned, saw a YouTube video where Akara said people with Costo tend to be anxious. If true, are people more anxious from Costo, or is Costo a result of anxiety and stress? So this is important because as we go through these exercises, this is relevant. So again, if we talk about the stress component, stress and anxiety needs something to pick on for Costo to be there. But the trouble with Costo is it's a vicious circle, because having Costo is often a stressful and an anxious and a frustrating experience for people. So once you have it, it can absolutely feed into this vicious cycle of perpetuating it and keeping it there. But for me personally, from what I would come to understand clinically with my patients, I would argue that your nervous system needs to have some sense of being heightened to begin with. And that can be from being an anxious person, or as I mentioned, suffering some trauma, or having had some really crap life experiences, or being in really nasty situations beforehand. And then if you develop the poor postures and the stiffnesses around the back, then that can lower your threshold to developing symptoms. I wouldn't say that it makes people with Costo more likely to have Costo, because there's so many other things that can develop. Like if someone's naturally anxious and the nervous system's more naturally heightened, chronic pain in general has the potential to feed off of that. So whether someone has low back pain or chronic headaches or chronic neck pain, that is one of the features of those things, because the chronic nature of it is wrapped up in the heightening of the nervous system. So as I said, as we go through these exercises, I want you to keep in mind that sense of safety versus threat. And when we do some stretches, we'll go through the ball exercise again, why not? We want to do each of these at a level that feels safe. We don't want you to feel anxious doing it. We want you to feel comfortable breathing normally, if breathing is okay for you to do with your Costo symptoms. Run everything that we do through the filter of, does this make me feel safe or threatened? Because if we do anything that has the best intentions, but we do it in a way or at an intensity or a level that makes you feel heightened, or maybe you're holding your breath a little bit, or you're feeling a little bit tense or anxious, again, we're sort of feeding into that threat perception rather than sort of dumping you out of it. So please keep that in mind. So it's just an important perspective. You're not just pain at the front of your chest. You're a human being that's potentially dealing with other things that washes over the front. So